It is the 7th forum. It's good that we're back on track. And we have the pleasure and the honor to have tonight with us here Professor Zaki Laïdi, Special Advisor to the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, and Professor Loukas Tsoukalis, President of the LMEP think tank. The theme of this panel is to discuss the issues of Europe's geopolitical role after the Ukraine crisis. I think that given the fact that everything starts with the word Ukraine today, obviously, I would like to turn first to Professor Laïdi and ask him, how does he feel that the situation as it has developed is within the limits of of what could be achieved by the EU at this stage? And let's start with that. I will remind everybody that we have 40 minutes at our disposal, so we have to be 40 minutes sharp, so we have to be practical and keep the time. Thank you. Professor.
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ambassador, for chairing this invitation, and to Loukas for sharing the floor with me. In order to be brief, I would like to start with say to what do we achieved since the beginning of this huge crisis, which is by far the largest crisis, largest geopolitical crisis Europe is facing. First, I think that we realized that Europe is in danger. And here I will start with an anecdote. As you know, I mean, most of you are probably familiar with European affairs. We've just published the Strategic Compass. And I was tasked by the HRVP to draft the introduction, his introduction to this compass. And the introduction started with the word, Europe is in danger. And this exercise took place 3 months ago. And I remember that within the bureaucracy, many people argued against this sentence, saying that it was not appropriate to talk about Europe is in danger. So I think that since then, nobody will seriously discuss the fact that Europe is in danger. So the feeling of being in danger is the first achievement. And in real politics, in the theory of international relations, the notion of danger is related to another notion, which is the notion of survival. Okay? The realist theory is based on the assumption that nation states, or ensemble like Europe, which is not a nation state, are confronted to a problem of survival. So, in a sense, it's our survival which is at stake through that crisis, and this is the prerequisite for becoming a geopolitical actor. Okay, so you need to feel that you are in danger, that your survival is at stake, and you have to take initiatives in order to precisely survive. Now, what we achieved in concrete terms, beyond the perceptions I've just mentioned, first, the unprecedented level of unity among European member states, in spite of obvious differences and sensitivities. Those sensitivities remain here, but the decision-making process was incredibly effective. And the capacity of Europe to move quickly, swiftly, in taking risk has, and frankly, this is a perception, has changed the way the rest of the world looked at Europe. And I'm not disclose secrets, but I remember a conversation with Secretary Blinken, who really told us that he was surprised and that it was very good news from the American side, that to see the Europeans acting together collectively and very swiftly. Now, we've done something which is new and in relation to what I already said, in a sense that we accepted to take a risk and to coerce our adversary, in this case, Russia. And the notion of coercion here is also important, if I relate this to my own thinking as a scholar, because I've always argued to my students that the mark of a hard power is not military power as such, but the capacity to coerce its opponents and adversaries. And we took the risk of coercing Russia in a very strong way. I mean, there are still loopholes, and I think that we have the opportunity to talk. But this is, I think, the expression of Europe as a hard power. And this is much more important, in my view, that, for example, being able to mobilize 5,000 people through a EU force, which is in the cards of the strategic compass. We have also accepted to do things we did before, giving money to member states to give lethal armaments to Ukraine, to a country in a war, through the EPF, European Peace Facility. And we've done, through this crisis, an important work of reaching out third nations to convince them to vote the resolution against Russia, of course, with the United States and the other like-minded states. But the European diplomacy has really been mobilized in order to reach out countries. And this is why, at the end, with other countries, we came to this wonderful result of having 140 countries voting against Russia. Another point which is very important and that we have achieved is that during this crisis, and still now, the relationship between the EU and the United States was absolutely wonderful. And it was wonderful not simply because we were virtually on the same line, but because we have the feeling that the Americans were taking Europeans seriously, and the measures we took were not taken because just to follow the United States.
I would like to ask you a question at this stage. It's, you use the sentence yourself, our survival is at stake.
Yeah.
What would you say should have been or could have been done more on the part of the EU concerning the crisis as things stand up to now?
Well, we can always do more, and we can certainly do more. But, I mean, to speak frankly, what we need to do more is to, let's say, limit the loopholes Russia is using. And the main loophole for me is the embargo on oil. So the day we will achieve that, and I think that we are very close to that, but I hope that we will not need another massacre to take this kind of decisions, because we decided to have an embargo on coal after the Bucha massacre. I hope that we are not going to wait another massacre to decide to stop our oil. Because, I mean, in a sense, those who are saying that we are feeding indirectly the world effort of Mr. Putin are not totally wrong. I know that it's difficult. It's not an easy issue, but there are truly solutions which have been actually worked out by the international agency for energy. And you probably know that all European countries have strategic reserves of 3 months, of 3 months. And since our imports from Russia represent 25% of our oil imports, it means that we have 1 year to find alternative solution as far as oil is concerned.
Professor Tsoukalis, what is your view on what we have started to talk about?
Okay, thank you very much. First point is there's absolutely no doubt that the war in Ukraine is a game changer. And it could potentially serve as a catalyst for the development of a European geopolitical role. But the emphasis is potentially, because if I'm allowed, I would like to take a slightly different time perspective and look at how the way we've come to here. The first point to make, which is rather obvious, is that before the war in Ukraine, geopolitics essentially remained a foreign language in Brussels. We didn't know how to speak geopolitics in Brussels because the idea was that the European Union, and I'm saying things that are pretty obvious, the European Union was supposed to be a trade and economic power, that it would thrive in the context of ever-growing economic interdependence, global institutions, multilateral rules. This is the stuff that European dreams are made of. And we had also decided for long to delegate, essentially, our defense and security to NATO and the United States as our protector of last resort. Now, to be fair, the world reality in recent years have conspired to disabuse Europeans constantly of their illusions. And there's been a number of events that have helped to disabuse us of our illusions. First of all, we began to discover that some countries were not playing the globalization game according to rules. China, perhaps least of all. Second, we discovered, not that far ago, that US policy, or rather US unilateralism, can be very painful, can be very aggressive. And that was the time of Trump. And there is, I'm afraid, no guarantee that there will be no Trumps in the future in the United States. Number three, we discovered that instead of economic interdependence being a means to achieve international peace, economic interdependence could also serve as a weapon for security reasons. So it's exactly the opposite. And now, last but not least, we discover that President Putin is ready, is becoming not only revisionist, but increasingly revanchist, and is ready to wage war on the European continent. Now, this is a game changer. I perfectly agree with Zaki that the reaction of Europe was remarkably swift, decisive, and united, which is not the sort of stuff we were used to experience in the past. And Europeans on the big issues of foreign policy have repeatedly been divided. And I could name many examples. So European unity makes a very welcome change. And it is extremely important. And it is European unity in the context of the unity of the Atlantic Alliance. I mean, if you think about it, this is, I think, the best example of the law of unintended consequences. Putin has succeeded in uniting the Atlantic Alliance, uniting Europe, and has contributed more than anybody else to the strengthening of Ukrainian national identity. So, chapeau, as they say in Turkish.
Do you believe that there are more European illusions to be dealt with?
Yes, perhaps, because in the sense that we are united in our sanctions, in our response to Russia, which is extremely welcome. The question is, how long will our unity last? What are the ends we want to achieve, and with whom? Can we aspire to EU unity of 27? Will Atlantic Alliance and Atlantic unity survive another round of wrong people being in power in Washington? So Putin is the immediate problem. It's a very serious one, and it is a kind of existential threat that we had not experienced until now. Fully with you. But there are other challenges waiting around the corner, and they are not just wild scenarios. They are pretty plausible scenarios, all of them. So then the question is, given those scenarios, and assuming that one or more of them materialize, how are we going to respond? So our learning of geopolitics as a foreign language has to be extremely fast. In Brussels.
Professor Laïdi, what is your point on the idea of European illusions? Are you on track with Professor Tsoukalis, or would you have something else?
Well, in the position in which I am, I'm trying to think positively in terms of actions. And of course, there are a lot of challenges ahead of us. We need to reinforce. So we, first of all, need to reinforce our support to Ukraine through military means. The American support has been wonderful. The British support is extremely efficient. The Polish support is admirable. The mobilization of public opinion in Europe has reached a point which is unthinkable. I mean, in France, for example, there is a presidential election next Sunday, but nobody heard about the campaign. It's unbelievable. Everybody's talking about Ukraine. And for the first time, we felt that this is a deep crisis which is putting our security in danger. So the danger is close to us. Okay, it's not Afghanistan or even Iraq.
But if I may, I mean, again, deliberately playing devil's advocate. The European reaction, and not only governments, but public opinion, is indeed remarkable. What I'm not sure about, and this is wearing my devil's advocate hat, is how much are European citizens prepared to pay as a price for what they declare to be their solidarity. Are Germans prepared to forego oil and gas from Russia? Are they prepared to accept the consequences for German industry or for their capacity to have air conditioning in the months to come? Are the French are prepared to accept higher food prices, not only higher energy prices? And to put it bluntly, because this is really a problem facing Europe. Europe is going to pay a much bigger price for this war than any other part of the world. Are we ready for it? Are we aware of the kind of price that we are expected to pay? Because it's one thing to express solidarity verbally. And people, it's great watching television and say how terrible Putin is, which he is. But what are we exactly prepared to do or forego as part of our welfare?
Yes, I think it is true that the average European citizen hasn't yet felt really the result, what will touch his everyday life, his or her everyday life in the months to come. What would you think that is an answer to that, on the basis of what Professor Tsoukalis said?
Well,
as far as the Europeans.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, since we are confronted to a very serious challenge, we have to face this challenge, and we cannot spend our time to say to the citizen, watch out, what is going to happen is very serious. Are we prepared to that? But I mean, I think that beyond prices on oil and food, they are very, very, very serious issues which are at stake. And those issues are called chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. And those are serious issues on which we need to think, because unfortunately, it's not a simple video game. So we have to face those political challenges, and we have to strengthen the pressure on the Russian regime. And we need to talk seriously to those who may be tempted in the world to support, under the radars, Russia, and I name China. It happens that I participated last week to the EU-China summit, so not reveal secrets, but the fact is that we are far apart. And precisely, and this is for the EU an opportunity to play the role of a geopolitical actor, for example, vis-à-vis China, in engaging them. And what we want to do, and I hope that we're going to do it, is to engage China on two very serious issues. The first is the use of WMDs. The use of? WMDs.
Weapons of mass destruction.
What we need is to have, and I'm speaking here on a personal basis, okay? To make things clear. My desire is to have the Chinese committing themselves in favor of a UN resolution banning the use of WMDs in Ukraine, without naming any participant in the war, because the Russians are arguing that the Americans are supporting the Ukrainians and preparing the use of biological arms. Okay, so let's vote a resolution. Let's send a UN team on the ground with Chinese specialists. So we need to engage them. And the message we send to the Chinese is that you are a big power, you are a large power, you are a permanent member of the Security Council. You need to get involved in the solution of the conflict, because the message of the Chinese is to say, well, I mean, we should avoid to have a kind of new Cold War. But the president of the Council, European Council, I mean, I think was quite clever and told to the Chinese, if you want to avoid that, the best way is to precisely get involved. So if you want to have the reading of this conflict through the lenses of an East-West conflict, so precisely get involved in this and reach out, for example, Zelensky. And this is, here again, I mean, a slight example, a modest example, but we have urged the Chinese to talk to President Zelensky. And I think that in the next day, President Xi will certainly talk to President Zelensky. That is, I mean, those kind of acts, those kind of actions are precisely in line with what the EU should do as an international actor. But I agree with the fact that, I mean, the problem is not solved at all. Nobody knows what is the end game. Nobody knows if the global coalition which voted against Russia will not, become more fragile. We cannot exclude a kind of Ukrainian fatigue in Europe, elsewhere in the world. So nothing is solved. I mean, but first, I think that the two short-term elements which are going to play an important role is, of course, the capacity of the Ukrainians to fight and to repeal the
Professor
Russians.
Tsoukalis, what is your view on the positive role that China can play?
I think it is absolutely right that Europe is trying to engage the Chinese as much as possible. It would be wonderful if we can get the Chinese and others to agree on a resolution against the use of weapons of mass destruction in general, not only in Ukraine. Whether we can actually push the Chinese far enough to take sides on the war in Ukraine is a different matter, and on this I'm not exactly optimistic. Because if I were to put myself in the shoes of the Chinese and seeing the prospect of a Cold War, actually they've experienced it already, waged from Washington against them, is it wise from their side to take clear sides? I'm not sure, I don't expect it. But this is again to provoke Zaki.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with you.
I need to add something to the provocation,
Sure. No,
if you allow me. In your opinion, China has its own agenda, which is an agenda for today and an agenda for tomorrow. Do you think that within the framework of these agendas, if I may call them, there is the space for the actions that Professor Tsoukalis suggests or thinks that could take place? Because I'm not sure that the Chinese, they have their own interests and their own planning. So where does this, Ukraine fits in what way in the sense of the future?
Okay, there are in this room specialists who have a much better knowledge than I do on China policy, and they certainly talk about it or will talk about it. But at this stage, well, first, we never expected from the Chinese to be on our side. So this is, and we never told them, please take side. We simply told them that if you support, as you said, the integrity of nation state, you should state it. And when you say to us and to the public opinion in general that you support the principle of the territorial integrity, and on the other side you are favorable to peace, okay, we tell them that's fine. We agree with you, but just tell us how you combine both those elements, and how do you, what is the modus operandi of reaching this? And our impression is that the Chinese, of course, are not going to oppose Russia. I mean, they told us in a way or another that they will not bypass sanctions, and they told us in a way or another that they will not sell arms to Russia, which is a good point. Beyond that, I think that first of all, we should not underestimate the ideological commitment of President Xi vis-à-vis Putin. I mean, he met him 40 times. They have a kind of chemistry, and you probably, all of you are aware of the declaration of February the 4th. So it would be difficult for the Chinese to say, no, okay, we took the wrong decision and we supported the wrong horse. Second issue is that fundamentally, the Chinese are reading this conflict through the lenses of their confrontation with the United States. So the bottom line for them is, okay, is this going to benefit the United States or benefit China? The problem is that they won't they rely on the alliance with Russia before the war. But what is the meaning for China to have an ally which is weakened and totally isolated? So we're not going to lecture the Chinese and tell them, take our side because we are on the right side of history. No, just tell them, is it really your interest to be close to a country which is isolated in the world and which is going to be terribly weakened economically? Okay, so so that's basically the sense of our message. I mean, at least seen from my personal view.
If I went back, Professor Laïdi, if I went back to the theme of our meeting this afternoon, I would like to ask you, how do you see our relations after what has happened in the Ukraine? How do you see the EU's relations evolving with the United States and with NATO?
Well, it's ambivalent. The relations are good. The relations are excellent. And in a sense, this crisis has proved, but that's probably something which is not shared by all member states, that we can be close to the United States and autonomous. And in a sense, that's what we did. I mean, we took decision in an autonomous way on the basis of our interests and our values. We didn't ask for the permission. It happens, fortunately, that was also the position of the United States, and it's incredibly easy to work with this administration. So, in a sense, you can argue that this crisis is revealing the capacity of Europe to be autonomous without putting into question its alliances. That is the message the HIVP is conveying every day. But of course, it's a hard sell within Europe. My personal position, and it's my strict personal position on this, on strategic autonomy, is that strategic autonomy will be endorsed by all Europeans the day the Americans say strategic autonomy of Europe is a very good thing.
Okay. And your position?
I would fully agree with
Tsoukalis?
that. The idea of strategic autonomy developed in response to the way the global system is going, and it was also fortified at the time of the Trump administration, to be honest.
Yes.
Okay? So it was strategic autonomy to protect yourself also from an aggressive unilateralism coming from Washington. Now, today, we are dealing with a US administration which is extremely easy to deal with. I mean, you know, there are people who don't have any serious disagreements. They recognize that Europeans can be autonomous in the context of Atlantic unity, which is great. So they are the right people in power. My worry and deep worry is that there is absolutely no guarantee that this will continue in the years to come, given how polarized is the US political system, and given the fact that some politicians, if I may put it provocatively and bluntly, in the United States make Marie Le Pen sound modest and moderate by comparison. So given that situation, Europeans could be faced with extremely awkward choices, because I fully agree with Zaki that the definition of European strategic autonomy, which has been difficult to sell to the 27, will be made infinitely easier if you have a US administration that says we actually support it. We support having a strong European pillar as part of the Atlantic Alliance.
So in that sequence of events, and if we came back to our EU world, do you feel that we can go along on the basis of the totality of member states, or how are we going to work around that?
On strategic autonomy,
yes.
or what? Well, I mean, the problem with strategic autonomy is, first of all, a problem of definition. You know, broadly speaking, when this concept had been popularized, and we had two kind of, let's say, oppositions or, let's say, caveats. The one comes from the Nordic countries, who are afraid that strategic autonomy will lead to a kind of protectionism, which is, I mean, personally, but probably because I'm French, it's very, very difficult to figure out this issue. But still, the point is that they fear that it will lead to a kind of protectionism. But in fact, economically speaking, so that's the reason why they insist on talking about open strategic autonomy. Okay, that's fine. But the COVID crisis has revealed our dependency and the necessity for Europe to become more resilient, okay? The other problem comes from, let's say, other countries on the military side, and of course, the compatibility between Europe, military operations and apparatus and strategy, with NATO. So the position is that the aim is not to duplicate NATO or to oppose NATO, but simply to act in areas which are not necessarily going to be covered by NATO. And that's, for example, the case of Sahel. So it's not a substitute to NATO. I mean, it's impossible. And look, even in what is interesting in the Ukrainian crisis is nobody is talking about sending troops, nor sending NATO. So in this sense, things are quite clear. So NATO is indispensable. But the point is not to be against NATO or to do things outside NATO. The crux of the matter is the ability and the capacity of the Europeans to have an autonomous way of thinking. We need to think by ourselves. And after thinking by ourselves, now we decide what kind of relations we are going to have with NATO or other partners outside NATO. So the crux of the matter is not NATO or not NATO, because we are virtually all within NATO, and I think that thanks to Mr. Putin, Finland is, and probably Sweden are going to join NATO, which is, I think, a good news for Europe. But being able to think by ourselves. And just to conclude on this, I mean, the Finns are a perfect illustration of what I would call European strategic autonomy. I don't know if you heard the fabulous discourse which had been made on 31st of December by the president of Finland, which is the greatest discourse which had been made by a European leader on the Ukrainian crisis.
Professor Tsoukalis, you're a European persona, and since you will conclude this talk this afternoon because time is running out, what is your view?
Now, straight answer to your straight question, and since I don't wear an official hat, I can be open. I believe that the future of a European foreign and defense policy can, at least in the beginning, not be based on 27. There is no way. There is no way that the 27 members of the EU will agree on anything but a low common denominator that is so low that it cannot even be visible. And remember that the 27 include also Orban's Hungary, among others. That's the worst example. So yes, my answer to your question is that if we really mean business about a common European foreign policy and gradually developing a European defense pillar, part of NATO, we need to start with coalitions of willing and able that show the way for others. We've done it in many other areas. why not in foreign policy and defense?
If I can just add a word on this.
Please do.
Based on my experience in Brussels on strategic autonomy. The more we talk about strategic autonomy, the more it is difficult to define it, because you have a reservation, caveats, remarks made by different states, member states. So instead of talking about strategic autonomy, we need to practice strategic autonomy. And we realized, even through that crisis, that it's not because we defined in advance what would be a European strategy. No, we were confronted to the crisis, we answered to the crisis, and I think that it's a perfect illustration on an empirical answer to strategic autonomy.
Well, I hope that we managed to convey a positive note through very difficult issues that we're facing, no doubt, in Europe and the world. And we have kept our time. And I thank you very much both for being here with us this afternoon. And many thanks to all for watching us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.